All right, while he's getting set up, we'll go ahead and get started. So we have 2 here in person and then 3 on Zoom, and this is about global perspective. So first I'll introduce George here. He's a seasoned litigator who possesses an LLM in space, cyber, and telecommunications law. He's currently vice chair of the Space Law Committee of the ABA Science and Technology Law Section. And then Paul, who just sat down, research fellow at Foundation for Strategic Research, working on space security issues with a focus on space and launch systems, as well as development policies and the influence of the new technologies on security and defense operators. And now I'm going to go to Zoom, and I have Dr. Minoo, and she gets the prize because she's in Australia and it's 1:30 in the morning. So please give her a little slack. She's a research engineer within the Space-Enabled Research Group at MIT Media Lab, where she focuses on applying space technology in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. And previously, she served as the executive director of the Space Generation Advisory Council in Vienna. We also have Scott Leonard, who probably most of the people in the audience know, technical director to the Office of Space Commerce, director for NOAA. He is considered a senior scientific leader with over 30 years of professional experience in aerospace. He currently leads the development of the OADR, which will serve as a modernized SSA management system to provide collision notifications to US satellite community. And last but not least, Athena is director of research in France, based at the Paris Observatory. She is also a planetologist and currently the chair of the ESA Human Spaceflight and Exploration Science Advisory Committee and the chair of the COSPAR. And so COSPAR panel on planetary protection. And we're actually going to start with Athena. So over to you for your presentation, and then we'll go to Scott and Dr. Minoo.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Charlie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I think you can hear me. I'm hearing some echo. Let me see if I can share my screen. If not, I'll just go ahead and just talk. I've sent you a my presentation in pre-recorded video, but let me see if I can share. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right, so
that's me. Hold on one second.
I see it. It's right here. Sorry. Okay, sorry. We're trying to bring it up on the big screen.
Oh, is okay. Shall I go ahead, Charlie?
Hold on a second.
Just wait a minute, please.
Okay. So anyway, while we're waiting, I'll just say, yes, I'm Athena Coustenis, and I'm very sorry to be with you virtually today, but traveling hasn't completely been reinstated in Europe. So, but I'm very thankful for the invitation to talk to this great workshop at this point. And I wanted to discuss a few items having to do with planetary protection and how to ensure a sustainable scientific investigations in outer space. So I don't know if you're seeing.
Go ahead and see your slides, so go ahead.
Okay, all right, so okay. So, like I said, I'm representing here today both the Advisory Science Committee at ESA, the European Space Agency, but also especially the Planetary Protection Panel within COSPAR. And I wanted to give you a few items for reflection here. And I just wanted to recognize in the previous slide, you saw that one of my vice chairs was Nicholas Hedman, who is the chief of the Committee on Policy and Legal Affairs section of the Office of Outer Space Affairs in the United Nations office at Vienna. And what we do in this panel, which is one of the panels and commissions of COSPAR in the structure of COSPAR, we serve something that we consider to be an important function for space agencies, in particular for people who are doing space activities, and that is to promote and develop and maintain actually the Coast Guard policy and the associated requirements. And to guide compliance actually was something that was mentioned a few times since yesterday, the Outer Space Treaty, which is ratified today by 111 nations. And I'm sure most of you here today and those listening in know what planetary protection refers to and are familiar with the statement shown here, which is to we want to protect the environments that we investigate and to conduct scientific investigations of possible extraterrestrial life forms, the precursors and remnants without jeopardizing the environment, but also in addition to make sure that the Earth is protected from any hazards that could be posed by extraterrestrial matter, which would be carried back to Earth by a spacecraft returning from an interplanetary mission. That is the backward contamination. What I mentioned before is the forward contamination. And of course, this policy we base on the most current peer-reviewed scientific knowledge. And we have several meetings now per year inviting all stakeholders. And I think it's important also to mention that we also include the private sector. But let me stress that it's not the purpose of our panel to specify the means by which adherence to the policy and the associated guidelines is achieved. This is reserved to the engineering judgment of the organization responsible for the planetary mission. So just to say that, of course, you know that one of the main items that govern space activities has to do with the responsible exploration of celestial bodies. And I want to highlight that for us, it is indeed very important to take this legal basis into account. And it's based on a couple of articles that I'm showing here that I'm not going to detail. But these articles are important in establishing that states are responsible for their national space activities, whether governmental or non-governmental. And just to show briefly what is the current composition of our panel, where we have 24 members currently, international members, and we're talking in this panel discussion today about global activities. And so these members are some of them from space agencies, including NASA, ESA, China, Japan, India, Canada, Russia, and other space agencies, but also 10 scientists that are there to give advice on broad scientific and engineering matters. And you can find the current composition in its totality, in the whole, on our website today. Just to mention that the panel is there to ensure that updates can be made to the policy when necessary. So we recently made quite a few innovative amendments to the policy to keep up with the fast development in space exploration. For instance, in 2020, the panel adopted the Coast Guard Planetary Protection Policy with an update of the requirements for the icy moons, and like Europa and Enceladus, which we implemented quickly. But also another case was brought to our attention by the managers of the JAXA-led Martian Moon Explorer mission, MMX, where we issued a special categorization for an unrestricted Earth return. Once the studies showed that the samples returned from Phobos would not present a threat for the Earth's biosphere after careful handling and processing. So another thing I just wanted to mention very briefly, last year, in view of the renewed interest for lunar exploration with all the new projects for robotic and human exploration, which will hopefully also return quite some scientific knowledge, we again updated the policy given the need to protect scientifically interesting regions like the PSRs, the permanently shadowed regions, but recognizing also the need for relaxation of some reporting requirements in the rest of the moon. And this is the new policy. You see it here, and you can find it in our publications and on our website. So just to say that I'm, as I said at the beginning, very happy to be here and contribute to this panel because I think that There are considerations to take into account for planetary protection, in particular for a sustainable space exploration and to safeguard our biosphere. And Charlie, back to you. I'm going to stop sharing here after this introduction.
Perfect. Thank you, Athena. And I know she has to leave early, so I'm going to ask her a question. And so it revolves around, we talked about the treaty, but you have these guidelines. And so how is the intent to get all nations to abide by the guidelines that you have established?
So like I said before, you know, one of the things is that we do have the Outer Space Treaty, right? And its progenies, and people are interested in respecting that treaty. And I don't think that treaty is something that is going to go away soon. I think what is important is to work with what we have at hand. Like I mentioned, in our panel, we have, I think, all major space agencies coming together and discussing, contributing to the discussions, contributing to anything we bring forward, like the updates that I mentioned. So I think trying to work with what we have is to initiate a dialogue among the different parties and among the different stakeholders, and get them to understand that it is their own interest also to abide by some of the rules I just mentioned that forbid you from contaminating another celestial body or from contaminating our biosphere. So at least for planetary protection, I heard a lot about debris in the past days and yesterday. But I think the way we explore our solar system is also very important. And the amendments that we have made for moon requirements, for instance, for other bodies that we explore, show that this is a flexible way of working all of us together. And by the time I think that we finish our discussions on a particular subject within the panel, everybody is agreeing around the table. So they go back and they tell their agencies, this is how we're going to proceed from now on in this particular mission or this particular exploration. I think that helps.
Thank you. All right, Scott, over to you.
Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to keep the video off just to save a little bit of bandwidth. Can everyone see on the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. So last year, in 21, we actually built an operational prototype of what you've heard as the Open Architecture Data Repository, or a new acronym that we should all get familiar with, OADR. And really, this was a proof of concept of how the Office of Space Commerce could potentially conduct the space situational awareness mission, for the government. And the thing about this prototype, Dr. Wood made some really interesting comments. That the keynote words, I heard was imagination, innovation, diversity. This is going to be really interesting because some of these areas are really accentuated in this architecture, and I really am excited here to share with it. So let's get right into it. So I just want to show you a little bit about the prototype itself. I want to talk about the architecture, the types of data we tested. I'm going to show you some specific examples of what a collision warning looks like that could be a little bit different than what we've noticed from CDMs. And all this information that we can provide is 24/7 in the US. So design. So as you see, this is kind of what we call our cartoon prototype overview. All these requirements, we did the design based on Space Policy Directive 3, which obviously mandated a new operational system to provide basic space situational awareness services. So first thing is a cloud-based architecture. And for us, we believe that was important because we really need to have something that's open, scalable, transparent, and we wanted to reduce the risk and lay a foundation for developing advanced SSA services. And so one of the key factors obviously is scalability, because we know a lot more satellites are planned for the future. In fact, about 57,000 by 2030, and realize we have just under 5,000 active satellites flying right now. So that's a pretty huge magnitude of increase. So when we're building a system, we need something that can accommodate the expected growth. So the other thing about the design is adaptable, support new technology, advanced algorithms, diverse data sets. That's important because we have the traditional methodology of bringing in satellite tracking data, but what about bringing other types of data like space weather data, satellite telemetry? The other thing about the design is it allows easy periodic system upgrades, IT security patches, because at the end of the day, our operations have to be reliable, safe, and secure. So the other thing is important is agility. This design promotes data sharing, data interoperability, a couple of things that Dr. Wood mentioned, because we really have to not have the collaboration not only with the US space community, but the international space community. So this is a global issue. So this is our basic SSA safety process, our process flow. And so the first thing over on the left, you see those diverse data sources I was talking about. Those go in securely ingested in the OADR. The little two QA boxes are important. These are really auditing tool areas that, we need to calibrate, validate, monitor all the data, entering the OADR. And then when we actually create the products, the solutions, we have to make sure our solutions are accurate before we send them out to the space community. And of course, what we did is we screened all the objects of space. We got the space catalog from the Space Force, and then we provided an assessment of potential collisions and based, on a risk and probability. Let's talk a little bit about more of the design. This is the stuff that I kind of get into my geeking mode here. So the OADR uses a modern cloud native architecture, and we use containerized services. And so basically a container software package, we combine the application software with the software required to operate in the cloud. We put it in a single package, we call it a container. Now, each major element of the OADR system runs in a container, and it's developed and deployed in a DevOps pipeline. And that's important because this approach will allow the OADR to easily scale out to handle more data. So some advantages. So containers can be easily ported to run on almost any computer systems, more efficient than virtual machines. Containerized software is easier to develop, test, and deploy. And by running software modules in separate isolated environments, containers actually improve security and reliability. So like a security breach or software fault in one container, it doesn't easily propagate to the other containers. So combining containers with microservices also improves reliability, enable developers to update one part of the system without affecting the other parts. So the platform really is a data lake, and it's built on open source software such as Kubernetes, Argo workflows, Hive. It's designed to automate data management. And I do want to key word is automate. And we also want to accelerate development, these computer intense applications, these things that use large amounts of data. The data system separates concerns so that if you're a casual user and you don't need to understand the whole system, you don't need to do your job. So by using this infrastructure as a code approach, this type of data system can be easily deployed to any cloud service provider or on-prem hardware cluster. So let's get a little bit involved discussing about what did we do? What kind of data do we look at? So we obviously tested with real world operational data that the Space Force gave us, and we also looked at some commercial industry data. We know the quality and accuracy of the products that we'll be producing depends on the frequency and the precision of the satellite data. Consistent and timely orbit measurements. They're necessary to maintain our quality orbit solutions. So for this demonstration that we had done, we actually used 60 days worth of data on 20,000 objects. So as I mentioned, the most of the data testing did with the DoD data, but we were able to take some commercial data with DoD data, and MIT Lincoln Labs that we worked with developed an OADR data fusion engine and actually incorporates both data sources. So by leveraging both sources of satellite tracking data, we want to focus on improving the tracking of space debris to provide more accurate conjunction warnings, because we know space debris is the biggest threat to satellite operations because the space debris is not going to get out of the way. It's not moving. The other thing is important is we believe the continued growth in the commercial space sensing sector presents an opportunity to expand coverage, diversity, and timeliness of data beyond the traditional government capability we've had before. So we'll talk a little bit about actually how does this system work. So as the information flows in the system, we apply standard astrodynamic algorithms to fuse the multiple data sources into orbit solutions. We produce several products for the users, the CDMs that you've seen, but we also bring in plots, 3D animations, and recommended maneuver mitigation actions. For this prototype, we just use the DoD algorithms that they currently use, but we can accommodate other algorithms in parallel, like from NASA, or use a commercial vendor. And that's important for the whole architecture using containers. So the updated solutions are stored in the database. We can use these inputs also for other services. So like an iPhone 13, once I build the phone, you can just bring in other apps, and apps like doing launch support, object reentry, space debris awareness, and lots of things we can do. We'll just talk about the conjunction warnings at this point. But so there's a little bit a screen snapshot that we recorded on the OADR actual processing data. Obviously, it creates a prediction from the orbit solutions on each object. We screened all the objects based on risk and probability to identify a possible conjunction warning. These warnings are automated. They come out and created and distributed to any satellite operator on their satellite, and it gives them enough time to allow them to maneuver if needed. So here's another thing that shows up that you may have a little bit familiar. This is the old scatter plot. So, after we run the process of screening, and by the way, just using a very basic bare-born service from Amazon, we were able to process all 20,000 objects, 60 days in under 15 minutes. So imagine what we can do, closer to near real time when we go operational with a higher level of service. So after you look at these, each one of these blue dots itself is represents a conjunction. And if you hover over a dot, you get information about conjunction, which might look very similar to CDM. And here's a close-up of that. This just shows you the conjunction between Ariane 5 rocket body and a Chinese meteorological satellite. I'll show you the cooler things that the leadership like to see. It's the cool 3D graphs. So these video animations are all physics-based, fully interactive. So this is Odin, a Swedish astrophysics satellite, debris from a Chinese satellite. So the yellow banner on top indicates the event has a medium probability collision, and we could pause the simulations and nearest close. But if you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you see that conjunction occurs over the Arctic with Alaska and Canada to the right and Russia to the left. And we can zoom in, rotate, everything. So zoom in down on the lower view here. So when you look down really, really low, quite a bit, you still can't see the ellipsoids around the objects. It shows the quality. That actually shows the orbit estimates for this example are very good. And we can also run these simulations backward and forward. So let's take a look at a conjunction that the data is not quite as accurate. So here's another example of this. So we have a GRACE follow-on spacecraft and a Chinese spacecraft. First thing you notice is a red banner indicates a high probability collision. So over that left corner there, we're zooming in. And by the way, the green bar, that shows 5 kilometers. That's our scale. Look at the yellow and pink ellipsoids. Now you can see these ellipsoids and the quality measurements of the two positions. Remember, the smaller the better. So in this situation, the bubbles are a lot larger. So it shows our data quality is so much lower. So what happens if we take the same event and we add more accurate data to the same conjunction? Here's the same one. The first thing you notice is the banner's yellow. So that shows also the probability collision a lot lower. And down in that lower left-hand corner, these bubbles are so small, you can't even see them. So this type of analysis showing you that adding more data, especially geometrically around an orbit, not just everything in perigee, but how about distributed across the orbit, reduces the probability even further. And that's something that we plan on going forward as we move forward in our operations. The other area I want to talk about is the proving ground. And this is the excitement for most of us in the research and development area. This is our development environment, and it's going to support research and development projects to really promote the advancement of space science and technology. I think the proving ground is critical to increase our understanding of the space environment, which can include the characterization of small debris, exploring diverse types of data. I mentioned space weather data to increase our orbit solution accuracies and look at our neutral density models, building cutting edge algorithms, and other models necessary to improve SSA. This is really want this to be our playground for academia and space researchers. We want to be able to collaborate, experiment. We want to put it in a controlled environment. I will mention that all the data will stay in this development environment. We can manage user access to any of the data, and we control with a full audit log to provide this to any data provider to make sure they know who's using the data for what. And I really believe this is the opportunity that allows us to work with that word diverse data sets. And I think that's important to really ideally position the OADR as that modern SSA system so we can continue our center of excellence that we're already doing in the US. So in conclusion, I just want to say that, this prototype was a great opportunity to show that we can provide accurate and actual results. We can put it in the cloud. And this is really the bigger picture, because we're already starting in the development of creating an operational OADR. And I think as you see the future, the collaboration, not only with how the government does, but how we integrate with commercial industry is going to be quite critical and important as we move forward. So exciting times in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. So we're going to shift over to Dr. Minoo.
Thanks very much, Charlie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just let me know that you're receiving it well.
Yes, it's good. Thank you.
Perfect. Excellent. And as you did mention, it's quite early in the morning here, but I'm going to be brave enough and share my video as well. So great. So thank you so much for having me as part of this conference and for this panel. I'm going to touch very briefly on the paper that we're submitting to the conference, talking about tools and approaches to value sustainability both on space, in space, but also on Earth. And this paper particularly explores long-term sustainability issues related to increasing activities in outer space, but with the focus on orbital debris and the need to address these challenges by utilizing a coordinated international, but also a transdisciplinary approach when it comes to the evolving regulatory framework. So the research in the paper specifically looks at the need for orbital and planetary sustainability with respect to the evolution of domestic, regional, as well as international regulatory instruments. But that needs to be really taken in place in conjunction with the sustainability of the Earth system. And so for this reason, the research focuses on the complexities of multiple environments and importantly, their interconnectedness from the perspective of two disciplines. So the first being engineering, and then the second being social science. And in this case, it would be law and economics. Now, there are several ongoing research attempts and practices to address the challenges associated with the increasing number of objects in orbit and to also foster global standards in waste mitigation. And when Professor Wood was talking earlier to her keynote, I'm glad that the SSR came up, but very briefly, the space sustainability rating is one way that we think we can contribute to this. And for those of you who don't know the space sustainability rating or the SSR, the concept stemmed from the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Space, and was designed and developed by an international and transdisciplinary team consisting of the Space-Enabled Research Group at MIT's Media Lab, the European Space Agency, the University of Texas at Austin, as well as BryceTech, and is currently hosted and administered by the EPFL eSpace Center based in Switzerland. And the aim of the SSR is to promote mission designs and operational concepts that avoid unhampered growth in space debris. And it also promotes a future where environmental review could be taken into consideration during all phases of a mission. So really thinking about the initial design phases of a satellite, all the way through to in-orbit operations and then disposal as well. So what I'm showing on screen here is just some of the modules that the paper goes into that consists of the SSR. So the SSR includes capabilities to answer some of the questions posed by what we call the Environment Vulnerability Decision Technology, so EVDT, integrated analysis framework, again, designed by the Space Enabled Research Group at MIT. And this framework is really interesting because it's used to explore relationships between the environment, social impact, human decision-making, as well as technology, as 4 key domains with complex interaction. And this in turn actually helps to clarify the relationship between the state of the orbital environments, impact to human society, but also the actions taken by space operators and the implementation of technologies to mitigate or to characterize space debris. So the SSR analysis captures some of the key questions posed by the EVDT complex modeling framework. And it's also a concrete approach that private as well as government sectors can take when it comes to pursuing what we call corporate social responsibility, or CSR. So there's a recognition of complex interactive systems which is necessary and is focused on that transdisciplinary, cooperative, as well as the democratic approach to knowledge production on human activities in outer space. And this involves the practical need for further studies, as Scott just mentioned, of the complexities and the complex areas, both in the public as well as the private sectors, again, in space, but also in the Earth systems. So this paper also thinks through, so SSR, EVDT, but also this concept of corporate social responsibility. And we know that human activities in outer space are arguably transcribing a variety of issues that really remain unsolved here on Earth. And we point to the long-term sustainability guidelines, and there's really only one mention of private actors, and the rest of the document refers to non-governmental entities and reaffirms that state responsibility for activities of non-governmental entities. So with regards to the corporate social responsibility, again, it reiterates that existing international law of outer space, but also the role that the private sector can take so that they identify themselves as part of the system and not part of just the economic activity or sole economic activity. And happy to take questions and go further into that, Charlie. I'll hand it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to come into the room and we'll have George go first.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a physicist, I'm not an engineer, and I'm here to talk about one of the problems associated with removing space junk. Debris is a nice word. Debris is a nice word, but let's just call it what it is. It's junk. Okay, and there are political, economic, and technical issues probably associated with removing it, but I'm only concerned here with the legal issue. Okay? These are my personal opinions concerning the legal issue of removing space junk. The easiest way to do it would be to amend the Outer Space Treaty regime to make it easy to remove the junk or debris in orbit. But the reality is that is simply not going to happen anytime soon, probably not even in our lifetime. So what we're left with is how do we interpret these existing treaties in light of the problems we're facing and encounter to address them. Now, the problem comes to the fundamental problem of the space law treaties is that it gives perpetual jurisdiction and ownership to space objects. And they define a space object as including any component part. So that includes the debris or junk. You never lose. The state never loses jurisdiction, and the owner never loses ownership rights. Now, that then becomes the problem of how do you remove it? How do you get it around? How does a third party remove it? How does any country remove it if it's not their own? That becomes the issue, and that becomes the problem. One approach, I submit, is to look at the rescue agreement. The rescue agreement deals with the recovery or return of space objects. Let's look at the wording, though, of a particular provision of the rescue agreement, which is Article 5, Section 4, which talks about the recovery of a space object elsewhere. And notice what it doesn't say is elsewhere on Earth. And I submit to you, space is elsewhere. So to the extent that the rescue agreement allows for the recovery of a derelict object elsewhere or in space, that opens the door to remove space junk that belongs to someone else. Now, there are procedures that the rescue agreement provides for that. And to that extent, we say that orbital debris comes within Article 5.4. Because one, it is a space object. Two, it's non-functional. It's not subject to any navigational control of its owner, the jurisdictional state. And it is hazardous. We all agree, space debris is hazardous. There's no way we can deny that because it affects when it's legitimate or functioning satellites in orbit and actually access it. So to that extent, when you can rescue or recover an object in outer space, which is beyond the territory of the state, that comes within Article 5, Section 4 of the rescue agreement. Now the issue becomes, just because you can then recover it or remove it from orbit, the question is, what do you do with it at that point in time? Now the rescue agreement provides that you have to contact with the owner or the jurisdictional state actually, and determine how do you dispose of this object to eliminate the hazard. Now, we can tell a lot of whom the object may belong to. And once you do that, how do you dispose of it? One, you cannot place it back in orbit because then that's only recreating the hazard that you recovered it from. So what is the procedure of disposing of the object that's been removed from space? That becomes a problem. But I also submit that creates an economic opportunity of maybe having facilities for recycling of some sort up in space, in which you can then, the object is removed from space, is transported to there to be either cannibalized or recycled or treated in some other fashion. And I would also submit trying to send it back into Earth to burn up through the atmosphere doesn't eliminate the hazard, because there's no way you can agree or you can say that the atmosphere will burn up the entire object, which therefore means that pieces that aren't consumed in the atmosphere will hit and destroy something on Earth. So I submit that that is not a viable alternative to eliminate the hazard under the rescue agreement. Now, the issue then becomes, well, what if you don't know who owns this object you've recovered? The registration convention has a provision of exercising due diligence to find or determine who may own it. And if so, then you work it from that perspective. And then consult with them as to how they want to dispose of this object. Now, if you can't determine who owns it, the Space Force Treaties does not, they're silent. It doesn't tell you what you have to do. And to that extent, I submit that if you can't determine who owns a hazardous space debris that you've retrieved from orbit, treat it as an abiotic space resource. Do whatever you want with it, if it can be cannibalized or if it can be recycled. So in conclusion, removing objects from space presents legal issues of jurisdiction and ownership. But I submit the rescue agreement provides a workaround on the perpetual ownership and the perpetual jurisdiction that can then facilitate removing the objects from space. Thank you very much.
All right, last but not least, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This presentation is going to be quite short, actually. I don't need to present a lot of it. It's just to let you know that there are European projects at the moment that deal with the topic of space traffic management, which is extremely timely. Unfortunately, we don't have the result of these projects yet because they are not finished, but I'm here to represent the Spaceways project, which is one of them, and which is charged of thinking about a potential solution to the problem of space traffic management from a European perspective. Oh, thank you. First of all, you have to know that the Spaceways project is an Horizon 2020 project. I don't know if everybody is aware of what Horizon 2020 research program is. It's a European Union research program that grants projects with funding and allows them to create research over a certain time span. In the case of Spaceways, it's 18 months, and so the program is going to be finished in June. And the overall objectives of the work program, the funding work program, is called Leadership in Enabling and Industrial Technologies in Space. These objectives are to reinforce Europe's autonomy in accessing and using space, maximizing the benefits of space for society and for the EU economy, and to foster a globally competitive and innovative European space sector while strengthening Europe's role as a global actor. So that's these are the overall objectives of the work program. Next slide, please. And so Spaceways is called the CSA, which is a coordination and support action. So basically our role is to analyze the current situation regarding space traffic management and to write, draft, and propose recommendations to the European Commission for the adoption, whether technical regulation or policy initiatives that we feel the European Union should take in the future. And so one of the main goals is to characterize and understand the context of STM, especially in its international and domestic dimensions regarding the standardization efforts led by the US, for instance, with SPD3, etc. So we have been looking at all these this context, and we are currently coming up with a recommendation to provide the European Union with options for the future. Next slide, please. So our objectives are, we have 5 main objectives actually. It's first creating a link with stakeholders. There is a community of stakeholders in Europe, the space stakeholders that have a say in what, and should have a say about what STM is going to be in the future. And so we are trying to create this type of community and to make them interact in order to better coordinate our recommendations and ensure that there is a global European view, let's say, on these issues. We also need to assess European technical capabilities at the moment with respect to STM requirements and future STM requirements, and that includes space situational awareness capabilities, for instance, first and foremost. Also assessing the legal and policy framework for STM, both in the European context and also the international context. As you mentioned, international law that was mentioned previously, that's a big part of the study. And finally, we proposed guidelines and best practices for STM in line with the European interest that I showed you previously. And also, our role is to contribute to the dissemination of these guidelines and the awareness, raise awareness globally of the existence of this project, which is the reasons for my presence here today. Next slide, please. So I think the strength of this project, can you go back to the previous slide, maybe? I think oh, no, sorry, it's the next. No, the next slide, this one. Thank you very much. I think one of the strengths of this project is actually the number of partners that we have that are directly contributing to this project. We have most of the major industrial players in Europe in the field of space manufacturing, etc. And also we have experts on the policy side and on the law and economics side that are internationally renowned. So we feel that the team is pretty strong to give the European Commission a good assessment of what the actions should be in the future to recommend a future course of action. Next slide, please. So you can see that our partners actually come from all over Europe, basically, and we are very proud of that. We try to give the diversity of views that this topic urgently needs at the moment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about the activities that we've been conducting in Spaceways and that we are still conducting. First, there is a stakeholders engagement platform. So not only in our consortium do we have main industrial actors from Europe and the main think tank dedicated to space policy, but we also have a stakeholder engagement platform that allows other type of actors such as satellite operators, new space startups, basically that was a big part, and other European institutions involved in European STM to contribute and to coordinate their views and their efforts to understand what their needs are to provide a better recommendations to the European Commissions. So next slide, please. One of the main activities was the legal policy and economic framework assessment. That's the activity that was conducted to assess the current legal framework around STM, the policy level framework and challenges that we face regarding STM, and the economic viability and European competitiveness in the future if the STM framework actually occurs and according to which rules. So all of those activities have been conducted, and we also had an assessment of the lessons learned from the air traffic management model that we talked about actually yesterday. It was one of the topic, and that was very interesting with the analogies and limitations of that kind of activities. The next activity, next slide, please, was of course a technological analysis for STM monitoring, especially regarding space situational awareness, what we generally call space surveillance and tracking in Europe, focusing on the requirements for those type of technological advances in terms of data collection, of data processing, data integration with the desired objectives of a future STM framework. Next slide, please. The other activity, the other technical activity was more focused on the technical regulations for the sustainable use of space to actually identify STM technical regulations, so more focused than a general law legal regime study, but more focused on activities going on at the ISO, for instance, the development of standards, and the convergence between the required evolution of space situational awareness capabilities with the requirements from an STM, a future STM regime. Next slide, please. Finally, the last activity is the drafting and writing of the recommendations themselves for a successful European approach to STM. And the objective is to translate the project results into a coherent set of actionable and impactful. Impactful is a very important word in this context. Recommendation to pave the way for a successful European approach to STM in Europe. And so we want to propose options, actions planned for the development of this approach in Europe. And we also will provide recommendations based on policy and technical analysis for a course of action for the European Commission. Next slide, please. And finally, we have activities of dissemination and outreach, of which my presence here is one example, and it aims at promoting, of course, the results of Spaceways internally and externally, also to a wider audience. You can find the Spaceways activity on our Twitter, on our LinkedIn, and we have a website where you can get more details on our operations and our activities. Thank you very much for this invitation, and thank you very much for your attention.
All right, I know we're close on time, but we started just a few minutes late. So I do want to take some questions from the audience. And while we're doing that, Scott, I'm going to go to you first based on the conversation that Paul just did on Spaceways. And so I'm seeing obviously the US kind of setting up their own space traffic management SSA system. And then obviously the EU is also focusing on that. So how are we going to bring those two things together from a global perspective?
Well, great question, Charlie. So I think it's important, as we roll out here to get our system upwards. In fact, one of the things that we actually do, and we actually have a technical study with the EU SST to really look at our data interoperability. So that way we can show how we can connect the data, what are the formats, the standards within the data, how we can use that. So we're looking at that. It won't be near term, because the first thing I need to do is get the system up and running from the US perspective, get that going. But within 5 years, there's no reason why we should not be collaborating across international, because this is obviously a global issue. And so that's our plan. So our near term is let's get this modernized SSA system up. Let's bring in diverse type of data, make sure we have a development environment, a proving ground, so we can keep doing advancements and keep evolving. And then let's, as we are doing near term right now, already start working outside internationally to figure out, interoperability of data, because we need to collaborate this. And again, my near term goal from the commerce perspective is really focused on the space debris. And because we have so many false positives, these CDMs that come out, and it's just really impactful on the satellite community. And what we want to do is reduce the number of that. So when you're actually seeing something, it's a viable product that you can do that. And while I mentioned that, the other thing important is to collaborate on how we're going to do this autonomously. We need to automate. We need to look at the large LEO constellations. We don't need to have all these 8-hour processing, batch processing, so you get an update. These updates should be near real time when data comes in, so users can make more proactive decisions on what they're doing.
Agreed, Scott. Any questions from the audience?
If I could just add to what Scott said, we are investigating a schema called the International Virtual Observatory, which was begun about 20 years ago in the astronomical community. A lot of the expertise for the IVO resides within NIST, which is part of the Department of Commerce. And we think that might be a good way to, an open and transparent way to exchange information, not just data, but information in a secure fashion between all the interested parties without having to do a lot of bilateral exchange agreements. That's what it was designed for, to allow that. So I just wanted to add on to Scott's excellent presentation. And if I could, I'll ask a question of George.
Yeah.
So George, I like your presentation, and we've been looking at this too, and we kind of came up with, so there's the things you track and you know where they came from, and then there's the stuff you don't. The things you do know the ownership of, we kind of thought that the first line of removing that is via a contract and consent mechanism. I know that's kind of an exotic legal term, but we thought that was a good way. I can see this interesting, this rescue thing was very interesting, but that might be for emergency situations when you can't get a contract in place. But something's headed for the International Space Station or something, and you wanted to take care of it. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I was just saying, what I interpret the law as allowing. Okay, now I understand the political concern or all the other concerns about, well, do you use that in an emergency situation? Yes, you can. But in everyday situations, yeah, it'll be a lot easier to get the consent from the jurisdictional state or from the launching state or from the owner. Okay, but if you cannot do that, then this becomes an alternative that can be done, okay? And another way to essentially to do this from, let's say, the United States perspective, to the extent the United States is a launching state, all right, with all of the debris deemed to be the jurisdictional state, it can always exercise its power of eminent domain and take ownership of everything there. Then it doesn't have to contact anybody, okay? It can decide on its own what to do just by exercising eminent domain and taking title to all debris for which it is deemed the launching state. But to me, the problem becomes when you go to trying to get consent. When you live in a capitalist country, it's going to be what's in it for me. What am I getting out of it? And you want to sort of try to avoid those situations.
Okay. Can you meet me halfway?
All right, that question for Scott and Paul probably too. I saw the 4 steps there. The 3rd was innovation. 4th was validation. So this whole room innovates just fine. Validation of where the roadblock is. So in this new system, how do you keep validation at the speed of innovation so that we can roll technology out faster?
I'm not sure I understand the question properly. Maybe that's more of a question for Scott regarding the OADR.
Scott, you want to try?
Sure. So I think what you're mentioning is, how do we innovate? How do we move forward? And one of the things I mentioned in the presentation is the proving ground. The proving ground's key. As we build the requirements, we're doing that right now. Our level 1 requirements to get the system out. We're also looking at what we're doing in the future, and we need this help from a collaboration amongst the space community. So in parallel, we're building this proving ground so we can take data and build cutting edge algorithms. I mentioned, space weather. NOAA's launching a new space weather satellite in 2025. Why is that important? Neutral density models, atmospheric drag. We need to make those improvements in those areas. What about how do we talk to a satellite, machine to machine? How do we integrate artificial intelligence, machine learning into these areas? How? In a proving ground. So what the government needs to do at this point in my perspective, and this is my opinion, is we need to catch up. I think the commercial sector has done a fantastic job. I've been collaborating with them. We've seen some good things they can do. Let's modernize the great work DoD has done, bring it into a cloud format, get a proving ground, and then invite academia, R&D to come in and innovate. And we can take that innovation and through a DevOps pipeline from the proving ground to the OADR, we can operationalize that so we can advance science and technology. That's the areas that we're planning to do.
All right, with that's going to be the last one because I know we're over time. So thanks everybody. Thanks for everybody that was on the panel, and let's take a break.